Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lenfest Center for the Arts at Columbia University School of the Arts. Thank you for joining us for the Complex Issues Constructing a Nervous System event. I'm Deborah Paredez, a faculty member in the School of the Arts writing program and in the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, and I'm happy to welcome you all here today. To begin, Columbia University School of the Arts recognizes Manhattan as part of the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Lenni, Lenape, and Wappinger people. We continue to address issues of exclusion, erasure, and systematic discrimination through ongoing education and a commitment to equitable representation. Tonight's conversation between Margo Jefferson and me is the first event of the 2022-23 season of public programs and engagement organized around the concept of to transform. In it, we present conversations, screenings, readings, and research about work that enacts transformation on physical, social, political, and psychic landscapes and the complexities that ensue. You can read more about this at arts.columbia.edu. This conversation is also a part of the School of the Arts' ongoing Complex Issues series, which highlights recent work by faculty of Columbia. Thank you to Carol Becker, the Dean of Columbia School of the Arts, as well as to our co-presenters, the Arts and Culture Concentration of Columbia's Journalism School, the African American and African Diaspora Studies Department, the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and the School of the Arts Writing Program. Tonight, we will hear from Margo, followed by a conversation between the two of us, and then an opportunity for you all to ask questions. Thank you as well to Book Culture for bringing books. Margo will be able to sign copies at the end of the evening. So many of us who are aspiring to hone the incisiveness of our criticism, or seeking to improve our own authentic autobiographical voice, or to lyrically and rigorously fuse the two genres, have looked up to the work of Margo Jefferson as a lodestar to guide us. My early encounter with Margo was more than a decade after she had won a 1995 Pulitzer Prize for criticism, when I was struggling to write my book about Selena and her fraught afterlife. I turned to Margo's book on Michael Jackson and found in its pages a model for engaging with depth and nuance and fearlessness and formal dexterity, the complex and controversial performers who shape our everyday lives. Our colleague, the esteemed cultural critic Hilton Alls, who's been reading Margo's work since her days at the Village Voice and Newsweek in the 1970s, praises her. He says, "She has a certain restlessness with form. That restlessness, that constant evolution of and beyond any constraints is what I most admire about her. There are writers who try to keep ahead of the times. I've always felt that the times have to try to keep up with Margo." Margo Jefferson, professor of writing, is a 2022 recipient of the Wendell Campbell Prize for Nonfiction. She's published 3 books on Michael Jackson in 2005, Negroland, a memoir in 2015, and Constructing a Nervous System, a memoir, just this year, from which she will read and answer questions today. Negroland won the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography, the International Bridge Prize, the Heartland Prize, and was shortlisted for the Bailey Gifford Prize. She's been a staff arts critic for the New York Times and Newsweek. She's published in a range of magazines. Critics have described Constructing a Nervous System as a double helix of personal history and critique, as a dreamy and peripatetic journey of mind and heart, and as a gorgeous memoir that elevates the form to new heights. Today, we are lucky enough to join her at these peaks. Please join me in welcoming Margo Jefferson.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Deborah. I'm so glad you're here with me this evening. All right, are these little lights where they need to be? Yes. I shall read from the beginning of the book because I think that sets a tone, pace, gives you a sense of what I'm after, about, around, beneath, over. All right. I stood in a bright, harsh light. The stage was bare. I extended my arm. No, flung, hurled it out, pointed an accusatory finger, then turned to an unseen audience and declared, "This is the woman with only one childhood." It was part of the night's dream work, and I was rattled when I woke up, for I'd been addressing myself. My tone was harsh, and my outstretched arm with its accusing finger had the force of that moment in melodrama when the villain, hitherto successful and unsuccessful in his schemes to ruin the heroine's life, when he is revealed, condemned, and readied for punishment. I understood what I had to do. At the end of his stage show, Bill Bojangles Robinson would look up at the lighting booth and shout, "Give me a light, my color." Pause, then blackout. When the light returned, I knew it was time to construct another nervous system. For most of my adult life, I'd felt that to become a person of complex and stirring character, a person, as I put it, of inner consequence, I must break myself into pieces, hammer, saw, chisel away at the unworthy parts, then rebuild. It was laborious, like stone masonry. And on the stone masonry model, the human self says, "Go on," admires itself for saying, "Go on," and proceeds to go on. As I went on, I grew dissatisfied. This edifice was too fixed. I wanted it to become an apparatus of mobile parts, parts that fuse, burst, fracture, cluster, hurtle, and drift. I wanted to hear its continuous thrum. Thrum go the materials of my life, chosen, imposed, inherited, made up. I imagined it as a nervous system, but not the standard biological one. It was an assemblage. My nervous system is my structure of recombinant thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and words. Repeat after me. It is time to construct another nervous system. You write criticism, you write memoir. What will be your tactics, strategies, instruments for constructing this nervous system? I keep carping and fussing, rearing up against the words critic and criticism. They're such august, temperate words. They make me think Gertrude Stein was right, that nouns are boring, because all they do is name things. And just naming names is all right when you want to call a roll, but is it good for anything else? When you're thrilled by a taffeta petticoat, a flying buttress, a sound chamber of notes and syllables, when an idea makes you feel as if the top of your head were being taken off, then abandon those two temperate prose zones and keep writing criticism. As for memoir, I keep attaching adjectives to it. Cultural memoir, temperamental memoir. What makes me so anxious? I want memoir and criticism to merge. Can they? And if so, how? Read on. There's no escaping the stuff of memory and experience. Dramatize it, analyze it, amend it accidentally, remake it intentionally. Call it temperamental autobiography. Be a critic of your own prose past. These words, for example. A young novelist asked me, "Why did you choose to write criticism?" "I wanted to make my way to the center of American culture and find ways to decenter it," I told her. "Why did you choose to write memoir?" she asked. "I wanted to make my way to my own American center and find language for the fractures there," I answered. Now, these words aren't wrong, and they've worked to set a mood for readings. They're too smooth, though, too graciously incantatory, too composed to show the valiant journey, the honorable aim. The roles assigned and assumed stand up especially straight, please. You are one of the first Black women critics here. You're among the first of your race and gender to steadily publish reviews in a cluster of widely read periodicals from the 1970s into the 21st century. Writing to honor and claim a permanent place for the arts and cultures of non-whites, non-males, and non-heterosexuals. Writing to savor and display your ease with them all, including the arts and cultures of white male heterosexuals. Writing to display your own gifts and skills. Is this commemoratively grand? Yes. Tonally accurate, too. Those times and those settings did require touches of self-protective grandeur. You were always calculating, and not always well, how to achieve, succeed as a symbol and a self. Remember, memoir is your present negotiating with versions of your past for a future you're willing to show up in. And I will read one other somewhat more, it's short, but it's a more collaged section. This is after I've written about a couple of centuries of Black women writers and artists being obsessed with Topsy, from Uncle Tom's Cabin, from Harriet Jacobs to Carol Walker to me. Injustice insists on its ancestral right of return. It's tenacious and versatile. It adapts to shifts of time, place, and character with plus ça change insouciance. Lexington, Kentucky, late 1830s. History. Captain Marriott complained that a gentleman could not rent a carriage on Sundays because slaves with ready money invariably rented them first for their own pleasure. New York, mid-1920s, The Great Gatsby. As we crossed Blackwell's Island, a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur, in which sat 3 modish Negroes, 2 bucks and a girl. I laughed aloud as the yolks of their eyeballs rolled toward us in haughty rivalry. Cast reversal in Hyde Park, Kenwood, Chicago, circa 2000. When she turned 85 and decided to stop driving, my mother arranged for Vilma, the Lithuanian woman who cleaned her apartment each Saturday, to take her grocery shopping. "How is that going?" I asked a few weeks later. Her voice exuded satisfaction. Vilma reaches into the car so carefully, Mother told me. She stretches out her arms and says, "Let me help you, Mrs. Jefferson." And I place my hands in hers and think, look who's driving Miss Daisy. This is a retirement benefit. My mother doesn't abuse her power, not in what she pays Vilma, what she requires her, or how she acts towards her. She's earned this after years in the race labor force. She has Social Security and social superiority now. Soon enough, she'll be too old and sick to enjoy them. Cast chat between 2 Black friends in a restaurant near the Metropolitan Museum, 2020. D. I don't know why I keep saying sorry when I call the waiter over for something. M. We were taught good manners, scrupulously and compensatorily. D. That's a good way of putting it. They resume eating. Families model caste relations. Families imprint them at the most primal level. A writers' conference, circa 2015. Over drinks, the talk turns to childhood. One writer seizes the lead to declare, my parents were much more interested in each other than in me. Some nights when they were dressing up to go out, yet again, I'd whisper, I wish I'd never been born. What I meant was, you wish I'd never been born. I couldn't say it out loud, though. I couldn't risk one of them answering honestly. The speaker was white, but her words brought a cruelly serene Akan proverb to mind. One does not acquire a slave in order to be affronted by him. Its parental equivalent could be, one does not produce a child in order to be disappointed by it. Or worse still, one does not produce a child in order to be bored by it. One does not construct a self in order to be bored by it either. Move on, Margo. Stretch your range. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so
Hello.
much.
Can you hear us? Yes. Yes?
Good?
Good.
All right.
All right.
I have the distinct honor of asking you some questions about this remarkable book. And as I said before, I learn so much and have learned so much from reading your work. Both, as I said to Margo beforehand, we have folks who can sometimes lean hard on one genre and do that well, and then they venture into another one and they kind of have to figure that one out. But Margo sort of can do criticism and memoir both so well individually, and so it's really such a treat to be able to see them fused in this way in this book. And so a lot of my questions will be about that fusion. So as you read actually in part of your reading today, I want to begin actually at the very beginning with the title, with constructing a nervous system, and in particular this idea of the nervous system that you're constructing. And you had said, right, my structure of recombinant thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and words. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came upon this idea or this concept, what it means to you, and in particular, how it relates to not just the content of the book, but the way that it is shaped, formed, and its tone. So if you could tell us a little about that.
All right. Well, first of all, there is a little section in the book where I talk about how I love to borrow from, appropriate, steal from other writers. And there's a little element of a present, a gift, and I'll take it and use it in this title. It actually came from a conversation I was having with Wendy Walters, who is a friend and our nonfiction chair. I was lamenting, it was a few years before I finished the book. A few, yeah. And we were at dinner, and I was saying, oh, it's so hard. And she said, yeah, it's really hard. And I said, all right, okay, you tell me why it's so hard. She said, because it's like you're constructing a nervous system. And I thought, it was extraordinarily helpful, because it gave me some sense that I could find a shape, an order that is external and internal, something that works, operates all the time, but that you can't always see or hear. And in my amendment of it, of the biological model, it was something that, like a piece of sculpture or a music composition, you could keep altering and revising, but its necessity would be to keep changing, replicating, then amending. So that I also used to, my father was a pediatrician, and I used to sometimes read, what's the old anatomy book?
Grace.
It's Grace. It is Grace. I thought, have I? Yeah. When I was much younger, in my 20s, I would periodically just read sections of it and look at it, and it was a way of connecting in some way with my father, but with this elaborately structured discipline that somehow or another gave me comfort and ease. That helped me structure because I had wanted, I want criticism, I want memoir. I had wanted the criticism to have the intensity that we know your work is going to have if you're writing about your parents, or your neighborhood, your various racial, sexual, gendered identities. Those are the sanctioned materials of memoir. But I wanted the objects, the figures, the records I was falling in love with. I wanted that to be an internal life that was intense and very specific. So that is constructing of, in fact, an aesthetic system, a nervous system, a temperament. And I wanted the memoir to have the critical distance, a phrase we like to use, or at least to use the instruments of critical distance, inquiry, stepping back, analyzing the structure of again, a particular experience, but also of this self that was me. That helped me, which I started to do in Negroland, to realize that I could change. I would have to change tenses, jump time, change tones. There are various, they're all companionable, but they're not all companionable selves. They're very little masks, little selves. I thought of them a lot as masks in Negroland. I thought of them more as persona, as various selves. Oh, okay, this is the one that likes Tina Turner, but really, really likes Ike just as much. Now, what are you going to do with her? You got to talk about her. So how are you going to do it? That allowed me to engage with, debate with, play games with these self-censoring emotions like shame, like embarrassment, and periodically appropriating other people's words, and I gave them credit for it, would help me with that too, because then that was a call and response.
Absolutely. It brings to mind, what is so striking for me about this work is how much vulnerability is in the work, right, throughout, and not in this kind of solipsistic way of like, look at me performing my vulnerability, but an actual, I think, it related to the personas, right, related to the kind of conversations these personas have with one another, that kind of vulnerability. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you got to the point where you could sort of stage that, and then how you decided to put it together, and how you decided to, what to include, right? Or
now those are all right. I'm going to ask you to as one by one. Now, the first one was how I figured out how I staged it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. How did I stage it? Each encounter, each thing that I became obsessed with, like say Ella Fitzgerald or Bud Powell, or
Which we'll get to, I promise.
oh no, it's fine. Or certain legacies of black male singers. Each one of those, first of all, took place at a different time in my life. So I would try to genuinely recreate both the verbotens of that time, to document or dramatize what, as an 8-year-old, I couldn't say, couldn't think, couldn't allow myself to, and try to at the same time re-engage with that, reanimate it. So there were always at least two things going on. And then, the third figure is I decided to make my manipulating hand as the Uber narrator very, very obvious. Because that also helped keep me alert to what I might be leaving out or what might be interestingly added, it also would keep me, it was an editorial device because it was a way of saying, well, why are you putting this here? Why do those things connect? Doesn't mean you always have to explain, but you have to find a way to structure, to change your language so that they're resonating with each other.
Absolutely, and we see this in the different typefaces, right? That happen in this book.
That was a visual aid.
Yeah. No, but I think that part of encountering those typefaces and those personas, and then the wide variety of formal maneuvers you make, right? Whether it's a kind of, now we're in a procedural mode and talking about about Cather, or a dialogue, right, between W.B. Du Bois and George Eliot, right? Or all of these self-implicating interjections. I think that for me was so exciting to see, because it did allow, I think, for your both castigating, Uber narrative self, but then for the vulnerable young
maybe
Margo,
the Uber narrative self needed to be there also, so that the vulnerable ones didn't feel, oh God, I'm out here by myself.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
For me, that's right.
That's actually a great way to think of it, right? And I think it's a model, right, for I guess if you were going to sort of instruct students how to do that, were there certain things that helped you get there, or it's just happened organically?
That was one. Sorry, constant rearranging and a lot of it literally rewriting words and sentences, but so much was, let me try to structure this differently. Let me, I thought these two things were speaking to each other or were, creating some, I think I said this in class this afternoon, some space between, the so-called transition is a space that is still, like John Cage,
Yeah.
it's still filled with surprising, ostensibly unheard things.
Absolutely. All of this for me, I think, definitely performs what you call early on the temperamental autobiography. You said, well, call it temperamental autobiography,
yes.
right? That vulnerability, those multiple voices and forms. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what a temperamental autobiography is, aside from the fact that we can read it, but how you came upon that as a particular phrasing and what that means for you in this book.
All right. I think it started, with just this task of its criticism, which always has to do, whatever your august formalities are, with, and, whatever your, yes, I understand genre, and so on, it always has to do with your temperament, with these all but irrational, intense responses and emotions that you then, give a, quote, civilized shape to. So, yeah, I also knew that I was not going to work with that, kind of, not really with a chronology. Yeah. And therefore, the tensions and the curiosities of a temperament. That's how we live. That's how we live. We learn what our temperaments are. We learn what nurtures them. We learn what we're allergic to, in essence. We learn how to seek our pleasures through them and how to stay. Well, we don't always learn how to stay away from the things that repel us. But we're in constant conversation, very intimate, and we tend to treasure our temperaments, if anything, to overvalue them.
Yes.
But it gave me faith in the internal, the internal rightness, if you will, at least for the purpose of writing, of this heterodoxy of loves and interests and semi-obsessions and decorums, etc. So that was really what I liked the sound of it too.
Absolutely.
Autobiography.
But I do think that focus on affect and also on, as you were mentioning, that it's so polyphonic as well, this work, because
yes.
of there's not just the conversations that are being had with between Margo now and Margo then, who absolutely had to admit about her fascination with Ike Turner, who we'll get to in a minute, but also the conversations that the staging of the conversations between multiple characters who inhabit the book,
Yes.
your own conversation that you're having with Cather in a new way, and then with yourself in relation to your students when you're teaching Cather.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Or, suddenly deciding, all right, here's a new way to pair as former child stars who became major cultural figures. Here's a way to pair James Baldwin and Sammy Davis Jr. I've written about both of them, but I didn't want to, I didn't want to just go retread, do it all over again. I needed, when you've lived with a figure as a writer for a long time, and even done, TV documentary commentary, which really kind of puts it in cement or concrete. No, you get a little, and they tell you what they want you to say. So when you've done that as a writer and you're still involved with the material, you really need to open yourself up to a new configuration, a new staging, and yourself as having a new role in it. In this case, I was kind of the MC. I'm staging this performance that they've got. Right. The other pieces I've written about them, it was, me and them. And kind of woman a mano.
Yes, exactly, right. And this idea of the MC, it's such a performative work, right? In many ways, and it's theatrical, right? It's theatrical.
Thank goodness,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. No, but I think that
The only thing
yeah.
I didn't write in terms of memoir about that was how very much I'd longed to be an actress at a certain point. Yeah.
Well, you got to be here.
I got to,
In all the
and I
personas.
got to be much more versatile than I ever was in my amateur days.
Well, and it's so interesting because it's both Margo stretching her range, right? Like you wrote, like you read earlier, and I think it also what strikes me, and this is because as someone who was trained as a performance scholar, I'm so drawn to the ways and inspired by the ways that you yourself use other performers as a model for how you think about your own process. You write, if I can just quote you briefly on page 52 and 53, a writer works with what she lacks as well as what she has. Watch a dancer adapt a movement to the constraints, the particular length and flexibility of their limbs. Listen to an actor or singer shift a line's rhythm to fit their range and timbre. Access your lacks to see what they might be put to. Develop other sources of plenty. And then you go on to talk about asking yourself, when do my fluencies become clever distractions from what needs writing? Oh, that like hit me right in the chest. Because it's like all of our preciousness, just needs to go away.
Well, you also remind me that, I wanted to go backstage in the writing process, and that again is a version of one's temperament as a writer and one's technique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, with helping writers see that, in fact, if we look to these other forms and other artists, we can actually gain, insight about how we, again, adapt the form, or adapt
Exactly.
whatever the given genre is to our own, whatever limitations or lacks, but that can be the space of inquiry and of exploration, I think is definitely put to use here.
Good.
In so many ways. So thinking about artists, performing artists, right? Because you spend so much of the book engaging with them, I think, in such smart ways. How and were you always fascinated by like performers? And obviously this book in some ways tell us a little bit about what they offer you. And you can speak to a particular one in the book. I have many, but even just in general, like, was there like moments that kind of grabbed you around performing artists in particular, rather than, and not just perhaps other kinds?
Yeah, it's something about you are taking in, consciously, unconsciously, whatever that space is between, both some sense of all of the work they've been doing out of your sight, in private, with teachers, whatever, and yet you are entirely in the moment that they are producing. And that it's in a body and in a voice, whether it's on television or in a movie or on a stage, is to me particularly thrilling. It appears, if they're good, miraculous, also so disciplined. And again, that sense of the mystery, but knowing it's there, all the elaborate machinery. Their nervous systems, how they toned them and tuned them and shaped them, and might do something different the next time.
Yeah, that idea of both presence and co-presence in that.
And hiding from you, and offering to you, yeah. And also totally engaged in it themselves. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they need you. There are certain performers that are always signaling, I need you, love me. Nevertheless, the self-sufficiency is again, in human bodies, is fascinating to me.
Right, and I think,
And the combination, you get the gestures, you get the voices, it's the multiplicity.
Yeah, it's like complex semiotics, right? All of that happening at once.
Complex semiotics.
Yeah, I think that, I could see that. It makes a lot of sense. You talk, obviously this work in so many ways is both, so resonant with and a kind of building on the large corpus of work that you've written about in regards to performers or figures that are sometimes troubling to us, or sometimes, we think of them one way and wow, like look at Margo helping us think about them in another way. Michael Jackson, right? If we go back, certainly a figure that you wrote about, and then you had that wonderful Guardian article, right, where you kind of revisited
Yes.
your engagements with Michael Jackson, and I love what you say.
It became an introduction to the paper.
Yes, right.
One had to take account.
Sure,
A
sure.
reckoning, as we
Yeah,
call it.
absolutely. But the thing I love about the work, and maybe you can talk a little bit about, just as a sidebar, about some of the things you talk about in that article, because I think they're so important to think through in a moment in which we are living in a kind of like, for lack of better words, cancel culture. How do we, how for you do you think about engagement and re-engagement and reckoning with figures like Jackson or others that we grew, certainly my generation as well, grew up absolutely engaged with in either adoration or any complex range of feelings?
Yeah, actually, I was talking about this with some of my students today in arts writing, life writing. How does the critic, who is also a fan, who is a lover of the art and the artist, reckon? And no, it's not just reckon. I get tired of that word. It's ubiquitous. How do you take in and your past passion and engagement, which was, all but rapturous, your present? I don't, one can be repelled, disillusioned, all of that, by an artist whom you once loved, shameful behaviors, but I don't really believe one fully hates them. I believe, portions of that love, however turned or twisted or contorted they might be, remain, and it's our task to find out, to name those, to explore them, to examine them, to see, to bring them to the next tormented case. We were reading Hanif Abdurraqib today when this came up, and he talks about, first of all, the nostalgia that we all have for that cherished moment. And it has as much to do with where we were, how we've sentimentalized, where we were when we first loved them. It has as much to do with that as the excitement of meeting them for the first time. So that goes there. Also, you really have to get kind of tough with yourself about what's the social context, meaning in the history, the historical, the race politics, the gender politics, the hierarchies of taste. What in terms of those power struggles did that artist represent? What do they still represent? How do you engage with it, but pull away from the sentimentality? Michael Jackson had a kind of, not just for me, obviously, for all the fans who still believe, oh, he's our boy. There was a kind of child, the savior child initially of Black people, the promise, strange as it sounds. Come on, he was a pop singer, but this chosen talent who was going to blaze his way into. That's hard to let go of.
And I think
And I did also, want to add,
Yes,
one of the reasons, one of the things that always impelled me to performers was I love child stars. And I think the root of that is, again, that, oh my God, they're doing what all the other people like them, the little kids, don't do, and they're top of the world, Ma. Yes. It's sublime. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that sitting with that, all of that, all of those feelings and all of both, the history and the context and the investments and your own sentimentality or nostalgia around
your own
it.
Needs and
really reckoning with that, I think, is something you do not only there and in the years since, but also with regards to the figure that populates this book, right? That many folks have don't even think of as controversial, they just think of as the bad guy, is Ike Turner. You talk about as a young child, and I'd love for you, if you want to share a little bit more about how Ike Turner was for you, became a kind of alter ego figure. I think that's the term you use, in part because your sister had to play Tina.
Exactly.
But I'd love to.
My older
Yes,
bossy
yes,
sister had
yes.
to be Tina.
You were stuck with Ike.
That's something that one loves about performers too. If you aspire to be one, I had to find a way, to interpret Ike,
Yeah.
so that I wasn't just secondary. But this is also intense black music, soul music, and tougher than, say, Motown was. Tougher than Sam Cooke was.
Absolutely.
They were there. They were very exciting. They were really black, and they were also crossing over into really white, which was extremely interesting. So, I think my sister and I both really studied them. We of course did the lip syncing all the time, but we were really studying their gestures. They both have this way of being very down, but also their diction can become.
I've always said that about Tina Turner's diction.
Tina is
She
the
can
same
like
way.
growl it, and still the diction is just perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of that too.
Yes.
Yes, Tina. And then suddenly we're like a black vaudevillian. But, that was terribly interesting. The Tina moves, how can you miss them? But his stillness, he meant power. It was masculine power.
Yeah.
And I was somewhat made anxious by it. I was even a little repelled, but I was also obviously fascinated. His stillness was extremely interesting to me. The non-expressiveness, particularly when we find out later how he expresses himself off camera, but none of the gyrations. It's another model, and it's just as prevalent and viable a model for black male performance as, say, James Brown.
Absolutely.
Or even the Motown. Choreographies. Of course, he wasn't the lead singer, but here was the guitar. The male instrument of power. There was this skinny guy in tight pants, utterly still, maybe saying, a line or two. Yes, Tina.
That's right. And then and for you, right, what that meant, right? What that offered you, right? Because it not only what it offered, I think, like for different sort of modes of black masculinity, but you talk, I think, really powerfully about as a young girl, like what that offered you, the alter ego, both in terms of like gender and class, right?
Yes, exactly. And the class stuff still makes me a little. It's so predictable, right? The guy across the track. But there it was. The gender stuff, he was the guy, even if you were scared to dance with him, if he held out his hand, you had to do it. You had to take his hand, and you had to sort of, try to move with him, but then if he got too fast, you had to kind of try to keep yourself a little away. All of that. So it was meshing with my negotiations, with any teen girl, and certainly black teen girls' negotiations, with, am I going to be a good girl? Am I going to be a slut? Am I going to be fast?
Yeah.
Oh my God, he's so dangerous and so interesting, and so talented.
Right. And as you said, in the book as well, not only with your sister, but you talk about going to the slumber parties and seeing that, like, the other girls they could do Tina better.
Than I could, so I had to find something for myself.
Right, but again, and that's what I mean by gender, like the reckoning with, like, some girls do the girl part better than me. Okay, who's left for me, right?
You're not going to make it worth something.
Exactly. Speaking of girl parts, yeah.
When Denise and I were very engaged with ballet, that was her thing. Music was supposed to be mine, but we were, who's your favorite dancer? Maria Tall Chief, Denise claimed. And so, okay, well, I'm Margo Fontaine, and I have that name. What's at stake in the
Absolutely.
So that's I was after that. It can feel silly and trivial, but a lot's at stake. That's how you're shaping.
But I think that's the shaping of the self too, right? Is through the identification with these performers in this case.
Exactly, and it's not all, we all have the story of, I go to college and I fall in love with a great writer, a great composer. A lot of what's come before and what remains, it's not the canonical necessarily, and it matters, though it becomes so often. It matters every bit as much to you, and it shapes you just as much. So I wanted, particularly as a critic, to show that avaricious,
Yes.
wild theme park.
Well, you definitely do. Speaking of girl parts, right? I would love to talk a little bit about the word diva, right, and what it means for you. Obviously, I have some investments in that word, imagine, but because what I appreciated about the book is how you mark how that term has been used historically as a term of actually diminishment and racialization and punishment for Black women, right? And how you're interested in thinking of the women that you talk about, Ella Fitzgerald, Odetta, Josephine Baker, and
She's never the diva.
Yes.
She
Absolutely.
loses out
Yeah,
even on the glamour part because she's not considered.
Right.
She's not, but
Right.
Josephine Baker, absolutely. Tina, yeah.
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 And so I'm wondering.
And it becomes a generic term. Oh, the Black divas. It's like that when everyone used to say someone was street smart, and
Yeah,
it was a Black
you knew what it was,
character,
what
right?
it meant exactly
From the hood. Right.
Exactly, diva means, and I think that's exactly right. That you're really interested in sort of pushing these figures outside of that particular kind of category.
Which I know you are doing.
I'm trying in my book, but with regards to this here, I feel like, if we could talk a little bit about your particular engagements with, for example, I'll start with Ella Fitzgerald, because you have, as I know you've been asked a million times, but this wonderful description of her performing and seeing her perform. And well, maybe I'll just let you tell us, like, what was it about her performing that you were sort of captivated by and also had a lot of complex feelings about?
All right. Well, as a young girl, there are all the jazz records, including Ella in the house, and the voice. It's a dream. She's a romantic heroine. She's a soubrette. She's an improviser. She's a wild. She has the kind of license that great nonsense writers have when she scats.
Totally.
And she's a virtuoso. But the dictates of girl glamour. I would say maybe especially because I'm speaking of the 50s and early 60s. Young Black girls. Yes, we had Lena Horne and Dorothy Dandridge, but Black girls and women were not in the gallery, the honorable gallery of what was considered beautiful, glamorous, etc. So we're always policing in a certain way the women, the Black men and women, but let's stick with femininity, who are appearing on television, who are in theaters, who are in occasionally Life magazine, who are certainly in Ebony magazine. What in terms of their clothes, their looks, their skin color, what is less than perfect by mass white standards? Ella Fitzgerald, the voice, the singing were perfect. She was big. She dressed very nicely, but she was not glamorous. And that was unsettling to me. And when I saw her on television, and you must again remember that, Blacks on television, on mainstream television shows in the 50s, 60s, it's a kind of civil rights march or demonstration or leg of the march. She would sweat, and it was very obvious that she was sweating, and she would often use a handkerchief to wipe it away. But women, including Lena Horne and Dorothy Dandridge, but certainly not even dancers that you saw, they were not visibly sweating on television. This was perspiration, and you called it perspiration, if you were more polite. But, this was one of those things, like modestes and tampons that, girls, this was not what the public wanted to think about or see. Sweat in my racial imagination was also very much associated with Black labor, Black female labor. You're on your knees, scrubbing those floors, and you're sweating. And that's what it is. It's sweat. It's not perspiration. So I would get rattled in all my aspiring decorum whenever Ella sweated. And she sweated because she was working as hard as any male instrumentalist, sometimes wearing them out with her virtuosity.
Yeah.
And so I really began the chapter. It starts with Bud Powell, and then I moved to Ella Fitzgerald and dwell with her. She is not a diva. She is a great singer. She is a great singer. And that therein lies the performance. She can be charming, she can be winning, but the performance of temperamental versatility and largeness, that's not what she does. And so, her records were always wildly successful, but I wanted to find my way into giving life, giving tension, giving honor, but drama honor, not just dull honor, to what she did do. And I found that inside the music. I found it inside this much more difficult and troubled, the life, the troubled, angst-ridden life of a diva who was abused in childhood and taken advantage of. She never talked about it.
Yeah, I think the discussion of Ella for me was, that just as a model of using that moment of your own kind of uneasiness or shame around what you once thought as the very starting point for then opening up a discussion of the labor that is not talked about, right, in, diva-like figures, right? It's all about the shiny product of the performance is just there.
Laboring.
And it's labor and it's discipline.
She is not, except for the sweating, she's not showing the,
No,
the labor. Her methods are not diva distraction, diva glamour, but she's not showing it. It's almost as if the woman without a temperament, though in the songs you hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there she was,
And it's a great take on her.
And she learned eventually how to turn, like Louis Armstrong, who may have been the model for, a white handkerchief, I'll do it. She learned how to make it, a useful and winning accessory. She stopped dabbing anxiously and would just, do that.
Absolutely. As she did. She really did. But your attentiveness, right, to how we get there, how we get to that gesture, right, is through documenting in many ways the labor, right?
Yes.
In the discipline.
Responses to it, which are not always appreciative.
That's right, right. But then and that's, I guess, where I see this moment of the memoir and the criticism actually feeding one another, infused, right? So that it's not just here's a memoir moment and here's the criticism moment, right? But in that very discussion, I think that we see the really, nuanced and delicate kind of beautiful sort of stitching of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Labor.
Labor, but yes, but not labored. But not labored.
Thank you. I had to steal a little Yeats. We labored to be beautiful, but we're talking about Ella Fitzgerald,
that's
not
right,
you.
That's right. Yes, exactly. That wonderful moment of the Yeats. We have just a couple minutes before we turn it over to the Q&A. And so, there's other questions I have. What's that? What do you say?
I said I wish I could hear that.
That we have, but maybe what I'll just have you talk about, and this is also, I think, maybe related to some of the other figures you talk about, but when you do talk towards the end of the book, maybe not, maybe towards the middle, and in your discussion of Nina Simone, you talk about Nina Simone, Betty Davis, and Ethel Waters, when you are thinking about models for anger, and you're thinking of this as a kind of counter diva mode. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Well,
what does that mean?
There is a section, it is a little further in the book, where, having been angry at various points in the narrative myself, I look back, and again, it's the conditioning, the upbringing, the constructing of the appropriate female selves in this particular historical period. And I say, women, anger needs I had written about chastity. That's the section that precedes it. And I say women need anger models, and they need to be as, honored and cherished as we used to feel about being chaste or virginal. And then I track. I shouldn't say kind of, I track starting with, pre-adolescence when I've gotten past wanting to be Beth in Little Women. I want a little more in the world. And so I track what is available, or at least to be, it's there, more was there, but what am I noticing? So I'm patching this together, okay, you've got the Supremes, yeah, and you've got Sandra D. What are you going to do with that? And it's still, I'm trying to characterize each one. Diana Ross was not angry. She was very cute. She was winning. She was saucy. But, she wasn't angry. So I keep trying to find bits and pieces. Etta James could be.
Yeah.
She could be sublimely, abject and tragic and angry as well. So I, kind of try to recreate these moments when you can seize on, okay, now that's anger and that works. My sister adored Betty Davis and Martha Graham. Well, Martha Graham has one dance, Cave of the Heart, where is it Medea?
It might be.
It's Medea, yeah.
Medea.
She pulls, a red, it's a scarf, it looks like it's bile. It's like her bloody anger out of what appears to be her stomach. My sister loved Betty Davis for all of those, dramatic performances. And my sister would often go to stores. And if she wasn't getting the attention she wanted, say at Bloomingdale's at the makeup counter, she would say, "Do you know who I am?" And the poor saleswoman would say, "What?" And she might say, "I'm Martha Graham." She wouldn't say, "I'm Betty Davis," but she would say, "I'm Martha Graham." And as she described it, the poor saleswoman would either not have no idea, but go with the authority, or, I don't know where she's coming from, but I'm going to be very nice to her. So that's what she would do. She later conceded to me, but these displays, I think this is so much. It's another version like me. I'm going to be Etta James. I'm going to be. It's another. We were searching everywhere, and we internalized, and we performed them constantly. Speaking of sentimentality, sometimes she would say when, oh God, what was the John Forsythe? Linda Evans.
The Linda Evans, Crystal. Or no,
Crystal.
No.
That's it.
Crystal.
Crystal.
Right? Wasn't it her?
What?
Crystal? Well, in
Dynasty, right?
it was
I
Alexis.
kept seeing
Yeah.
Dallas in my head, and I wanted Dynasty.
Yeah.
When Diane Carroll reemerged as Joan Collins' rival, Dominique Devereaux. That's when Denise would sometimes say, "I'm Diane Carroll." Great. And she said, they give me what I wanted, and sometimes I get a lot of free samples too.
So your sister could be one of those models, was one of those models for you too, right?
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I could see.
And she definitely loved diva practices.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Well, and Betty Davis. I mean, I think about that album. They say I'm different is just such a great. I mean, she's just like yeah. Right. It's beautiful. That anger.
So, and then Nina Simone becomes. I actually talk more about her first album, though. Her uses of anger and their punishing effect on her, actually, in ways we didn't know at the time. I mean, the emotional, the psychological. I don't mean the political. That was always welcome. But, she becomes a model for, or a thrilling, I mean, it's the craft, and it's the control, and it's, again, a kind of virtuosity, and, I can run this gamut of emotions with this low voice, that doesn't sound typically feminine, with certain kinds of instrumental, with my piano power that men have, and take it.
And take it.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely took it with this. I just want to thank you so much for this work and for really teaching us how to both kind of, again, fuse these genres and to model how to really write about those engagements we have with these figures who are larger than life that help us sort of move through our lives, no matter how big or small. So thank you so much, Margo.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
We have some time now for Q&A, and if you'd like to pose a question to Margo, you can come to either one of these mics, and you can make a line if you'd like, so that way we can everyone can hear your question. And we'll begin with whoever'd like to start.
You can sing if you want to. Yeah.
There's these mics over here, right in the audience. Yeah.
It is such a privilege and pleasure to be here with you. I have loved your work. I've tried reaching out to you a few times because after reading Negroland, I discovered we were both at Interlaken at the same time.
What is your name?
Well, I haven't finished. I'm getting ready to go back to my 55th class reunion from the academy. I started at the camp. I went to the camp first, which is how I got to the academy.
Okay.
Okay. For those of you who have not read it, and buy this book as well, but it's over there at the table. I want to thank you for the authentic documentation and expression of a middle-class Black life, one that has been lived, not necessarily recreated out of fantasy, but lived and told. In 1975, Norman Lear selected me to replace the actor Mike Evans on The Jeffersons as Lionel, George and Wheezy's son. I did it mainly because there was so little representation on television at that time of a Black family striving and moving up. I also want to ask you about the woman in Chicago, the Black actress. See, I only knew of Freddie Washington. I didn't know of the woman from Anna Lucasta, yes, who is in this book. How she impacted your life, how you met her.
I don't remember meeting her. According to my mother, when I was a child, I did meet her because she was a friend of my parents.
Right.
I don't remember that. But I knew about her through my parents. And then I did more research on her because my parents are both dead. My mother did tell me that story of Janice Kingslow coming after her nervous breakdowns, ending up at the same restaurant as she and my mother.
It's an incredible story.
It is, and she did tell me that story, but I also did, I did research on her. It's a heartbreaker, yeah.
Anyway,
very light-skinned, very talented.
Yes.
Couldn't play. Hollywood had offered her a contract if she passed. She refused to, but she was considered too light to play. Quote, authentic.
Did she play
as the culture defined it?
Did she play the lead in Anna Lucasta in Chicago? She
Yeah.
did. Okay.
Yeah, and then went to New York with it.
Okay.
And that's where Hollywood spotted her.
Okay. I'm so glad to finally meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got your own history. My God. Jefferson's.
Other questions?
Yes, I'll ask one. Since you're speaking of all the major figures,
Since what?
since you're speaking of so many major figures, the person I would like to ask you about is someone who just died recently, is Sidney Poitier. See if you have anything to say about Sidney Poitier.
He's not in the book, and he certainly could have been. And I think he isn't. God knows he symbolized and embodied and represented so many dreams and desires and fantasies for for white audiences, Black audiences. He was genuinely an icon. I could narrate a history as a viewer, but I was not ever deeply engaged with him. handsome. I remember weeping copiously when he got his Oscar. I'm so proud. I even remember saying that as I wept. But I was, it's a strange, in that way, it's not a comprehensive collection of passions. The temperature on my involvement with Sidney was lower than the temperature of my involvement with most of the people that I wrote about. Could I find a way to write about him in some other, writing context? Very possibly, but it wouldn't be powered by one-on-one passion. It would be powered by a great deal of interest in the social, historical, racial context and constructions. And that might happen, but that's why he's not there.
What's interesting is how many young people aren't aware of how the black community, a portion of the black community, was critical of him at the height of his success.
That's true too, yeah. Yeah.
Others?
I don't need a microphone. I was wondering, since we're similar ages, and certainly at a time in our lives, at least in my life, where I'm thinking about what do I want to contribute, be, accomplish, enjoy in the next decade. How did writing this memoir help you in thinking about constructing your future decades?
Very simply, it showed me that I could still do, as a writer, things I had not done before. It showed me that I was willing to take risks, even if they don't, I knew they were risks for me, even if they didn't, seem like risks necessarily to this or that reader. That is what I needed, that I still was curious, I still was passionate. There were still ways of thinking about the arts, my own life, society, that I hadn't expressed fully, or perhaps even thought of. So that was huge. All of that was huge. To believe that one goes forward and adventures and surprises oneself and hopefully surprises one's readers, and really technically you doing things I hadn't done before, even with Negro Land, but much more with constructing. Oh, I have to do scenes. Critics don't usually do scenes. Oh, okay, got to do intimate confession. Whoa, okay. Oh, I can really jump around from past to present. Criticism does many wonderful things, but it tends not to, give you that experience. So I really had to learn by reading other writers and by trying it over and over and over in both Negro Land and constructing to do things that I just hadn't as a writer.
I have a question, Margo. In addition to being a great memoirist and a great critic, you're, of course, a great educator. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a bit about how your experience with students has informed the thinking that informs this book.
Well, a huge portion of that, in all sorts of ways, you are always being tested by students. Supposedly you're always testing them, but you are also always being tested, and you're also just in everyday exchanges, exposed not only to what you know, but, to all sorts of references and allusions that you're not so familiar with. So, you're arrogant one moment and proud, and then you're embarrassed and perhaps a little humbled the next. So this is all useful in terms of a kind of active and complicated sense of your intelligence, your skills, how chronology and time, are shaping you, are shaping the generation. You can compare how you were made, all the forces that made you, with the newer ones that are making your students, along with the old ones. So that's a big deal. It turned out in this book to be extremely useful because I wanted to approach, in particular, a Willa Cather text that I felt as acutely as one feels if you've betrayed someone you love very much or really tanked out on some kind of relationship that was wildly important. I felt the ways in which I had not talked about all the complexities of race and how gender and class flowed from that in the 5 or 6 years that I'd been teaching Willa Cather's Song of the Lark. I really hadn't plumbed that. I'd somewhat avoided it. And it was that pedagogical situation which is always alive to me because I've kept teaching. So you're always asking, questioning, thinking, did I get that wrong? And so it was an extremely useful way to write a kind of procedural about what I'd done, what I hadn't done, what the losses were, what in a certain way the crime was, and how to redeem it.
Yeah, and in that moment, in that part is also, there's such great kind of, again, vulnerability around yourself as a teacher, right? You're sort of implicating yourself about like, oh, this is what I kind of want them to think of me. And like, I really appreciated that.
Yes, exactly.
That kind of self-examination.
I can't say this because I want to keep, I want to have a certain racial edge here, and I don't want to show that because maybe they're intimidated, and these were the white students, and I mostly had white students when I was teaching that particular text. Anyway, enough.
That's great. No, it was great.
Toni Morrison has written about Willa Cather, but not that novel. She was Toni Morrison. So my task was a little different.
Did you want to ask your question?
I was really impressed with your ability to take history and weave it into your own personal narrative. So when I was reading Negroland, I felt like I wanted to ask, did that help you to zoom out to the history of like your experience and educate everyone who might not understand that context, to then be able to like zoom into the very personal, because you get very personal in that, which I appreciate. Did that help you to be able to put things into context?
Did which one help me? The zooming out.
The zooming, to be able to put things in context
because
and also in order.
It was very important to me to get at the tensions and the collaborations between your historical, your political, your cultural history, and how that makes you, how that shapes you, and zooming in on the self, so what remains? What are you shaping? And shaping your own. What are you shaping yourself that has a certain independence, alliance with, but independence from this kind of superstructure of forces? I had to zoom out also because this world that I was writing about is contradictory and very secluded in some ways, world of the black upper middle class. There are a lot of myths about it. There are, including within that, world itself. So it was really important to me to narrate that as a kind of cultural historian. But that wouldn't have been enough. Who was the self who could look at it, who could give into it, who could love it, who could really criticize it and push back at it. Both parts were absolutely essential, and one wouldn't have worked without the other.
Yeah, I felt that way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's what we have time for.
Thank
you. Thank you, Margo. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not see you there. I'm so sorry. We do have to wrap up, but maybe would you like to ask? Can we go? Can we ask? Then let's do it. Okay, I wanted to make sure that my time manager was saying we could. Please ask.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I just wanted to ask if there was in Negroland versus your current work, whether there was a different emotional experience in writing each work, and kind of what the difference was and what maybe you would attribute it to.
That's, interesting question, yeah. Negroland, I felt in a very intimate way that I was writing both as a kind of, cultural
collective narrator and as, you know, a product of that world who had in many ways left it and worked to remake herself in the sense of making herself independent, not being only a product of this very rigorous and insistent upbringing. So, you know, that was what I was doing there. Here, I felt, I'm making it sound ecstatic. It was awfully grueling and painful, but here I thought, this one is for me. You know, here, the temperament and the combination of the forms of writing I do, and this inner life that of course is always connected to the external world, but which, you know, I'm processing, I'm collecting, I'm cherishing that. And I'll find whatever form I can to express that. So that was different. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. And thank you so much again. Thank you, Margo, for this wonderful book and these wonderful questions. And thank you, everyone. So if you'd like to purchase a book, you may, and Margo will be happy to sign them for you. So thank you.